Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus with Side Numbers Game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, and Baseball Rabbit Hole. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available under the Bleacher Bunch, wherever it is you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus. We can support the show and get a variety of benefits for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus, a spin on the baseball metric OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you could share this episode with a friend. It's November 27th, the day before Thanksgiving. What are you thankful for? I'm thankful for so many things, but certainly among them is a brand new bench for 2025. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Welcome into episode 95. Since no Cub has ever won number 95, let's talk about 95 wins. The last time the Cubs made the postseason in a non-COVID year was 2018. Cubs famously tied for the division lead with the Brewers and lost in game 163, but that team won 95 games. And that was the last time that I felt very confident in the Cubs as a team projected to win 90-plus games. Obviously, the Cubs had the tank and they had the rebuild when Jed and Theo and Jed at that point, took over under the new Ricketts ownership, which started back in 2010 officially. And there's a lot of talk about getting back to 91 seasons. Now, the Cubs obviously had that great run. 2015 probably came a year early. They won 97 games. 2016, they won 103. They backed off a little bit in 2017, but they still made it to the NLCS, third straight NLCS. And then 2018 is a season a lot of us don't really remember all that well. I mean, not that we've forgotten it. Some of us maybe have successfully blocked it out of our mind. But it doesn't leave that warm, fuzzy feeling. But that was a really good baseball team. I mean, that team kind of struggled down the stretch and still wound up at 95 wins. And that was a team, different system. You know, it would have probably been a very different outcome, potentially. I mean, the offense was struggling. They were really struggling late. But that season probably is a very different look if it's under today's playoff format. But, I mean, you play under the rules you have at the time, so that's certainly not sour grapes. Just pointing out something very different. We would all feel very differently about a Cubs team next year that wins 95 games. Maybe they potentially wouldn't, run a bye. Maybe they would play in an early series and lose. But, that's the price of competition. So what do the Cubs need to go back for? So, well, let's preface this, right? It's the day before Thanksgiving. We've already got guests in the house, families here. We're doing a lot of prep work, cooking today, so the house smells amazing. My wife just made some killer stuffing. It's in the oven right now, and that's all I smell, so I'm super hungry for lunch. But I've got a turkey all set to brine. Like, what do you do for Thanksgiving? Hit me up on social media. I put a poll out earlier this year. It looks like a lot of people are roasting, baking turkey, but a pretty good split between roasting a turkey and frying a turkey and smoking a turkey. I like to smoke it. I like to sit outside and get some of the cool fall air. But, when we think about what we're thankful for, I'm thankful for this audience, certainly. I love that you guys continue to listen and give me a platform to get my dumb thoughts out of my head, give me a place to vent, and probably save my family from a lot of Cubs talk they don't really care about. But I'm also thankful the Cubs have given me a lot of joy over the years. I've talked about my Cubs history. I've been a fan since the early 80s. In 1984, when I was 10 years old, the Cubs won the division. Ryan Sandberg became a league MVP, and that just imprinted on me for life. And I'll never shake that. I'm thankful for all the great seasons. I'm still kind of I have my expectations. I talk about this every week, about the things I want to see. But at a root level, I'm still kind of that little boy that didn't really expect things to ever go well. And when they do, it's great, and I'm thankful for it. So that's made the last couple of years really frustrating. And I see a lot of the angst out there on social media, Twitter, Blue Sky. Hey, I'm getting contacted by a few people here and there on Blue Sky. Love the new followers out there. The follower count's going up. I'm going to try to be more active over there. I still get most of my engagement on Twitter. So if you're on Blue Sky and you're looking for interaction, hit me up. I will certainly have discussions over there. I try to be more active, but with finding resources, I kind of go where the action is. And so far, that's still Twitter, although it's much more pleasant over on Blue Sky. So I don't know. I'll try to be active both places. There's a lot of strong feelings out there right now. We've seen all the reports that the Cubs are not going to be in on Juan Soto. They're not going to be in on Corbin Burns. Maybe they're not going to be in on Max Fried. The pitcher side, I still don't care as much about. There's still a lot of pitchers. There's a lot of pitching left on the table. There are trades that could potentially be made. We constantly hear rumors about trades with Seattle for one of their young starting pitchers. I could still see the Cubs potentially making a deal with the Marlins, maybe go get Jesus Luzardo or one of their other young good pitchers. And there are good free agents left. I mean, Shane Bieber's out there, Walker Buehler's out there, lesser deal, Nick Pavetta's out there. There's still the rookie Sasaki question. And so last night, the Dodgers came to terms with Blake Snell, 5 years, $182 million. It's a big contract. There's a reason why Snell didn't get the deal he was looking for last offseason. Now, to his credit, he followed it up and had a hell of a year this year. But he's still a guy that doesn't consistently go deep in games, and he's often inconsistent. But what the Dodgers are doing, the Dodgers are setting that playbook for when you go get a megastar and you invest an absolute crap ton of money. You know, this is what you do. When they go sign Shohei Ohtani and they commit $700 million to him and they commit to a 10-year contract, you know in the back half of that contract, maybe Ohtani's not going to be pitching anymore. At some point, he's going to start to get old and play like a mere human being. That's going to come. You know, Father Time is undefeated and comes for us all. But you know you have an amazing baseball player, obviously, you know, multiple MVPs at this point. You have an amazing baseball player who's going to be good, you would expect. Not good. Be elite, great, Hall of Fame, first ballot Hall of Fame level good for probably 5 years. So the Dodgers are absolutely maxing out that 5 years. You know, they went and got Yoshinobu Yamamoto. They traded for Tyler Glasnow. Now they signed Blake Snell. But they also still have a pitching staff that still has holes. I mean, you can't count on Tyler Glasnow to pitch a whole season. I'm not sure you can trust Blake Snell to pitch a whole season. You know, Miller and May are question marks coming back from last year. Shohei Ohtani's coming off Tommy John surgery. Yamamoto looks good, but he missed a chunk of time last year. So they're still piecing it together. But I see a lot of this angst about, you know, the big super team. And then they, to their credit, they largely are one. There's a reason why they won the World Series this year. But there seems to be kind of this prevailing sense out on social media that the Dodgers are literally going to go sign everybody. I mean, they have a 26-man roster limit just like everybody else. They have a 13-man pitching staff limit just like everybody else. They're going to get guys. They still might get somebody else. They might get Roki Sasaki. I don't know what Roki Sasaki wants. Did he come over here wanting to be a Dodger? If he did, he probably will be. Did he come over here wanting to be the top dog in a pitching staff? If he does, it won't be in LA. It might not even be with the Cubs if he were to sign with the Cubs. But, you know, we don't know what he's looking for. There'll be plenty of Roki Sasaki speculation. So it's now come out that he is not going to post until probably early to mid-December, which would put that 45-day window past the January 15th date when all the international bonus pool money resets. I talked a little bit about that last week. So it looks like he won't sign until after January 15th next year, which puts a lot of things in play. It puts a lot of other teams in play. What's also going to be interesting is every year when that threshold crosses, there are always a bunch of signings, typically in the Dominican, to teenagers who have been already basically promised deals. And so there will be a team or two out there that already have verbal commitments to teenagers that might rescind on those, drop the amount of money in the contract in order to get more in to sweeten the deal for Sasaki. We'll see. His camp has said that obviously if money was his number one thing, he would have waited 2 more years to post and he would get something like Yamamoto got. Him coming over now guarantees he'll get a nice signing bonus of possibly up to like 10 million at the max. Not that that's a max. I think that'll be about the most pool money anybody has to give him next year. And then he's going to make league minimum for a few years until he hits arbitration and goes through that process, just like Shohei Ohtani did. So if he was all about the money, he would have waited 2 years, gotten exceedingly wealthy, and come over like Yamamoto did. So we'll kind of table the talk on Sasaki. I think he's a really interesting get, but there are Point is, there are a lot of other options on the table for the Cubs. I know there's a sense that the Cubs are not going to be very aggressive. And we'll see. I mean, being super aggressive in free agency has never been Jed's MO. I keep hoping it'll change, but at this point, I'm no longer, there's so much this week, so many reports coming out about the Cubs are trying to get out of Cody Bellinger's deal. They want to save that money. And there's this prevailing sense that the Cubs are going to go cheap and that Jed doesn't want to do anything. And I still hear, well, they're just going to run it back next year with the same team. And that's the piece I want to address today, really. They're running it back with the same team. So the Cubs last week were very active at the non-tender deadline. And I think those moves matter. I know I talk a lot about strengthening the bench. I talked about all last season. I've already talked about it this offseason. I make an appearance on the Bricks Behind the Ivy podcast that probably will post soon. I talked about it there too. The Cubs bench last year was so bad that Craig Counsell decided he was better off letting Dansby Swanson play for 2 weeks with a bad knee, letting Nico Horner play through a broken finger, letting Cody Bellinger come back too soon from fractured ribs because he didn't want to play the bench. And so those guys played hurt, didn't play well. They struggled. That helped lead to some of the offensive problems the Cubs had, especially early in the season. I don't think it's any great surprise that the Cubs' best stretch of the season was in August when their schedule gave them a lot of natural off days. And those guys got healthy. I mean, shocking, right? Like rested, healthy ball players play better. And so the Cubs had to do something to address the bench. And so the idea, last week, the Cubs did make a trade for a reliever. I talked about that on episode 94. They traded Alfonso Rosario to the Guardians for Eli Morgan. It's a good get. He's not going to be the closer. He's not going to be necessarily an elite setup guy, but he's a guy who's proven he can get out to the major league level. He has an elite low contact rate. He has an elite hard contact rate. Does not give up hard contact. That's apparently very hard for me to say the day before Thanksgiving. So I'm thankful for, I guess, not being able to speak. And he's a guy who can pitch in multiple roles. He can come in and throw a couple innings and help bridge the gap from a starter that maybe has to leave early to the back end bullpen guys. He can do a lot of things. I think it's a good pickup. Probably most importantly, though, the Cubs currently do not have a backup catcher. The Patrick Wisdom era is over. He was designated for assignment. Then he is elected free agency, cleared waivers. Nick Madrigal was non-tendered. Obviously, we knew Brennan Davis and Edward Ozolay were designated for assignment to open up roster spots. And actually, I misspoke. The Cubs do have a backup catcher, Matt Tice. We'll see if he's the guy that actually sticks as the backup catcher, but that spot is filled. That was a bad oversight on my part. And then maybe in the least surprising move, say non-tendered Nick Madrigal. Maybe the most surprising move was non-tendering Mike Tauchman. I'm very happy about the Wisdom and Madrigal moves. I mean, I've talked about Wisdom having to go for 2 years now. That move absolutely had to happen. I like Patrick Wisdom. I think he's a hell of a guy. I love watching him. He's had great interactions with my kid, but it's just not good enough for the Cubs bench right now. And so I wish him the best. I think he'll catch on with the team somewhere. He does have an option year remaining, so whoever signs him can spend the year going up and down, so you don't even have to commit to taking him on your bench the full season. Mike Tauchman surprised me a little bit because he is a really, really good fourth outfielder. He is the kind of veteran bat, pinch hitter, give you a quality at bat every time in a big spot that good teams have on their bench. But also, the Cubs don't have a lot of roster flexibility right now, so he's not so elite at that role that the Cubs couldn't get somebody else to fill that spot, and so I'm okay with it. So what the Cubs have done is what I've wanted them to do. They've nuked their bench. The bench is gone. And I still see people talking about running it back. They're not running it back. A lot of the starting lineup is going to look the same. There may be some trades. They may be able to trade Cody Bellinger. They might trade Itzhak Paredes. They might trade Nico Horner. There are guys they might trade. But that bench is going to be very different. And I think that could be one of the most underrated changes the Cubs make this offseason. That's been a huge, huge problem for them. And I'm happy to see that being addressed. Sure, I want Juan Soto. I want ace starting pitching. I want elite bullpen arms. There's time to go. Obviously, the Cubs are probably not in on Juan Soto. Maybe not for the top-end starting pitcher market. But there are starting pitchers to get. There are relief arms to get. Maybe they'll pay the closer premium for Tanner Scott. I doubt it. But out of the non-tender deadline, that creates opportunity. Every time we go through one of those periods where teams have to let guys go, there becomes a whole new class of player that wasn't on the table for you before. So now a guy like Kyle Finnegan, who had a bunch of saves with the Nationals this year, I'm not sure why they non-tendered him. It doesn't really make any sense to me. He's probably projected to make about $8 million. Maybe on the free agent market, maybe he gets bid up a little bit. If this is a expensive pitching year, maybe he gets 10, 12. He's a really good pitcher. He could close. So that's the kind of move you might want to make if you want to go into next season with Porter Hodges, the closer, which I've advocated for and continue to do so. You have to have a plan B. And a guy like Kyle Finnegan could absolutely be that plan B. And there are some other options on the table too. Maybe I was a little bit surprised Julian Merriweather was tendered, but I'm hoping it's a good sign with regard to his health, with what they see out of him right now. Excuse me. But the other guys out there, Ryan Stanek, AJ Minter is a guy from the Braves I really like. He's a lefty. The Cubs need an impact lefty, and AJ Minter could absolutely be that guy. He's probably going to cost $3 to $5 million AAV. 2-year contract, one of those. He could absolutely be one of those Andrew Chafin, David Robertson kind of pickups. And, that's where the Cubs need to be. But the Cubs are going to rebuild this bench, and we'll see what they do. But when you look, I also want to talk about spending because, there's this sense that the Cubs are going to go cheap, that, they're just going to save all that they want to dump Cody Bellinger's salary. They want to save this money and they're just going to go play a bunch of kids and be cheap. Well, I don't believe it. Jed and Tom don't say much. And one thing I've come to the decision on is I'm going to stop trying to read between the lines, read the tea leaves, whatever analogy you want to use. The Cubs just don't give us anything. And so we're left to fill in our own devices. And you can look around the landscape and look at the big Cubs accounts, the beat writers and all that. And, I disagree with a lot of them, but they're just looking at the information vacuum and making their own logical decisions to fill in the gaps. So I think it's fairly clear the Cubs are not going to be playing at the top of the free agent market. They typically don't under Jed Hoyer. I can disagree with that all day long. I've talked about the Cubs. The Cubs should spend more than they do. They're a big market team. I think they have. I've seen some of the logical arguments about, a lot of the money that comes in goes to other companies. Technically, there's a real estate company that owns a lot of the property around Chicago. Marquee is a separate company, and I get all that. And everybody, it's business. Everybody's going to be profitable. The Ricketts family made a bunch of decisions on how to carve this stuff up so that certain revenue streams wouldn't have to necessarily go to the team. That said, I think nothing would bring in more revenue than having a World Series caliber baseball team. You're going to increase your TV ratings. You're going to increase your value of your other properties. You're going to bring more people to the ballpark. You're going to generate more excitement, sell more merch, generally build a lot more goodwill with fans. I mean, we saw that especially from 2014 forward until about 2018, 2019. But I want to look back and just look at what the Cubs have done. So I can only get salary data on SpotTrack going back to 2011. Cubs bought the team, finalized the deal in October 2009. So 2010 was the first season under Tom Ricketts. At that point, a new owner is not going to completely overhaul the entire roster day one. So the first couple seasons, there's a lot of carryover. So the 2010 season was his first. I don't have those payroll numbers. I recall the Cubs were pretty highly paid at that point. They, I hear a lot of machines outside. We'll keep this recording going, and hopefully the background noise is not too much. So much for, gotta love the sound of trimmers and leaf blowers. But so let's talk about what the Cubs have done. So, with 2011 being the first year I can have salary data on the Cubs, 2010 the Cubs were pretty expensive at that point. They had Alfonso Soriano's contract. They still had Derek Lee and Aramis Ramirez and a bunch of those guys. I think Dempster was still with the team at that point. So that was kind of the end of that last window, and the carryover is right there. So in 2011, the Cubs were 6th in baseball in payroll. 2012, 2013, 2014, obviously they did sign the disastrous Edwin Jackson contract. For the most part, they went cheaper, stepped back. They were 14th in baseball in 2012, 14th in 2013, came to 18th in 2014 because that's when they really went young. There were a lot of kids playing that year. But then they turned it. They brought in John Lester, started getting more aggressive with signings. And of course, this is Theo's era, not Jed Hoyer's. And that took them to, they were 10th in the league. And I'm using the CBT, the luxury tax threshold system. That's the one I care about. That's the one that teams are making their decisions on based on whether or not they want to pay the tax. Whether they're going to treat it like a cap or not, that's the number we're basing it off of. So in that category, the Cubs were 10th in baseball in 2015. They were 4th in 2016. Obviously, they made a bunch of additions then. They brought in Jason Hayward, Ben Zobrist, traded midseason for Aroldis Chapman, and got to a top 5 payroll in the season. 2017, they fell back a little bit, but still 9th. 2018, they were 5th. 2019, they were 2nd. Then that's the year where things really started to change. So that's the year, famously, Theo said the offense was broken, and that they were 2nd for 2 reasons. One, they never locked up, they had extended Anthony Rizzo, and then they did extend Kyle Hendricks. But Chris Bryant, Javier Baez, Wilson Contreras, Kyle Schwarber, they never extended those other guys. And so those guys were getting more and more expensive with arbitration. And the Cubs weren't developing pitching. Rob Zastrinsky is the only guy really they ever brought up during that time period. And so the Cubs kept having to go buy starting pitching. They had to trade Jorge Soler to get Wade Davis in 2017, which worked out really, really well. It was a good use of a Jorge Soler that really didn't play significant major league time until 2019, really. He was injured most of 2017 and 2018, didn't do a ton, then came on big, and he's made a nice career for himself, and he's shown some of the talent we all knew was in there. But the Cubs had to go sign, they didn't have to, but they had to go chase pitching. So they signed Yu Darvish, they signed Tyler Chatwood, they signed Brandon Morrow, and not all those guys were good decisions. 2019 is the famous David Descalso offseason. It wasn't really just the Descalso offseason, though. It was the fact that they were, and that's used as an example of the Cubs being cheap, and I suppose in some ways maybe it is. That was the year, pretty sure that was the year that Bryce Harper was available. A lot of people wanted to go get him. Manny Machado was either 2018 or 2019, don't remember off the top of my head. So that same era. 2019 would have been the year that they traded for Nick Castellanos, if I remember correctly. But 2019, the Cubs felt like they had to pick up Cole Hamels' $20 million option. So that's not a free agent signing, but it's effectively going out and spending another $20 million on the starting pitcher. And the Cubs had the 2nd highest payroll in baseball in 2019. So they were over the threshold. They were paying the tax. They had been aggressive on pitching. And let me bring that up. The Cubs spent $237 million that year, $6 million behind Boston for the tops in baseball. They paid a $7.5 million tax bill. So is it huge? No, but only 3 teams in baseball paid the tax that year. Boston paid $13.4 million, Cubs paid 7.6, thereabouts, and the Yankees paid 6.7. Everybody else was under the tax. That was the last, and that was actually the last time that the Dodgers reset. So the Cubs had a lot of money on the books. You look at that season, and let me bring up their payroll from that year. But they had John Lester making almost $26 million a year. They had Jason Hayward at 23, Yu Darvish at 21, Cole Hamels at 20, Craig Kimbrell came on for 14. Chris Bryant was making just about $13 million. Tyler Chatwood, 12.6. Quintana, 10.5. Like that. And that payroll looks actually an awful lot like what the Cubs spent this year. It was pretty close to the same amount of money and a very similar distribution. So we've seen the Cubs kind of hold in this line. I mean, they had some arb relievers, Kyle Hendricks had just signed his extension, making 7.4. They had some vet relievers like Pedro Strop. Anthony Rizzo was still cheap on his deal that he had signed back in 2014. And 2019 was when they traded for Castellanos. So he came in, they added $3 million worth of his salary at the deadline. There was a lot there, and it didn't work. And so the Cubs needed to transition, and I don't know what they would have done. They didn't make a ton of major moves into 2020. Of course, then we know COVID hit. Cubs were 3rd in baseball in 2020 for whatever that's worth. That was such a weird year. I think I think some of the sell-off, some of the move to rebuild might have started happening a year earlier. They might have made a different push, but that was obviously a bizarre season with, 60 games, no fans, no revenues, everything was closed. And so the revenues went away. That also led into the infamous biblical losses from Tom. There was a lot of debt coming due with the work they had done at Wrigley Field and whatever. That became something no fans really wanted to hear about. But then even when the Cubs stepped it back, 2021, they did the sell-off. So there was some carryover. They got rid of some salary. They were 15th in baseball. 2022, when they went with guys like Rafael Ortega, Frank Schwindel, just trying to see what the Cubs could do, they were still 12th in baseball in payroll. They were 10th in 2023. They were 9th in 2024. So this idea that the Cubs are going to step it back and just kind of have a cheap payroll and run like the Rays or run like the Brewers, it's just not going to happen. Like the Cubs right now, if the Cubs do not trade Cody Bellinger, they have about $50 million to spend before the cap. CBT, cap, whatever you want to call it, luxury tax threshold. They're probably going to spend the bulk of that money. They may not go over. We'll see what they wind up doing. I still haven't seen final numbers. We won't see the final 2024 payroll numbers for probably another few weeks, maybe end of the year. Got to figure out all those performance incentives and all that. There's still some disagreement between like Spot Track and Roster Resource on Fangraphs. The Cubs have said they expected to go over, but I also think the Cubs expected Cody Bellinger to opt out. And if Cody Bellinger had opted out, they would have been over because his salary at AAV of $26.6 million would have basically gone to a 1-year, $30 million contract. And that would have put them over. We knew that from the start of the season. They were so close. Spot Track still has the Cubs a couple million under. Roster Resource has the Cubs $1 million over. I kind of lean towards the $1 million over since that's what the Cubs themselves have said. But again, like this stuff isn't final. It's very complex. It's hard to you can't just stack up payrolls. There are player benefits and other things that go into it. So the final calculations and the Cubs are so tight on that fringe, it could still go either way. So I could see the Cubs potentially deciding to have this be a reset year and not stack up additional penalties if they were to go over by a little bit. I think that would be a bad move. It's not the move I want them to make. But if they stay under, expect them to leave themselves probably at least $5, maybe $10 million ahead of the tax threshold because they're going to want to put themselves in position to add at the deadline. Jed has always said he wants to be active at the trade deadline. And they'll give themselves some outs. Now, maybe a mix buy sell. We'll see how the season goes. I mean, if the season's terrible, it might be a sell. If the season is really, and they'll have some assets. Unlike this year when they really weren't built to sell at all, the Cubs would be in a much better position to sell this season if they wind up having that kind of year. But if they have that kind of year, Jed should be fired anyway because this is lame duck year. It's the last year. He needs to take that step up. So I'm not going to focus on whether or not they'll sell later. Maybe, maybe not. But they have about $50 million ahead of the CBT with where they stand right now with Cody Bellinger. Now that's assuming and using estimates that people put out there for arbitration guys. We'll see. Those are usually pretty accurate. So 50-ish. I would expect them to spend at least 40 of that. If they trade Cody Bellinger, the 50 goes to like 75. So then I would expect them to spend at least 60, 65 of that. So I think that's where the Cubs are right now. I think the Cubs fully expected Cody Bellinger to opt out. He did not. So that kind of changed some of their plans, and I think they're trying to pivot. We'll see. I don't think the Cubs are going to trade Cody away in a deal where they eat like all of his contract, or that they are trading him away for nothing or some other terrible contract. Now, if there's another big contract that makes sense, I could see it. Like, I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't think it's likely at all, but I saw some speculation that maybe like a deal with the Diamondbacks where you send Cody Bellinger to Arizona and the Cubs get Jordan Montgomery back. I don't know if I would hate it. Give the Cubs a lot of lefties in the rotation, which is not entirely the worst thing in the world. I don't think Jordan Montgomery is going to be anywhere near as bad as he was last year. I think this year he's going to come in and have a normal season, normal offseason, normal spring training, build himself up the right way. He's a quality pitcher. But he and Bellinger are fairly similarly paid. Both have the same amount of time left on their deal. Both have an opt-out after the season. So that would be a pretty one-for-one switch. It would give the Cubs another starting pitcher, open up a position player spot, not really change the money appreciably at all. So, I don't know. There's so many options. And when the Cubs do this, they're going to be looking for bullpen depth. Probably at least one starting pitcher. They might do two, but I would expect one. Whether that's in trade, whether that's signing Walker Buehler. I'm still really high on Shane Bieber. I know he's coming off injuries. There are some questions, but at his best, he's a Cy Young level ace. And so if the Cubs could get him on a prove-it deal, something 1 to 2 years with heavy incentives, maybe a 3-year deal with an opt-out or two, give him a chance to come back, show that he's healthy. Cubs can benefit. If all of a sudden, you're replacing Kyle Hendricks that we saw last year with Shane Bieber or potentially Walker Buehler, that's a massive upgrade for that starting rotation, especially given that there could be some fallback. I mean, I don't know if Wrigley's going to play as cold as it did last season. I don't know if Shota Imanaga is going to be able to repeat his season. I mean, I think Shota Imanaga has shown he's a really good pitcher. I think he's going to continue to be a very good pitcher. But he out threw everybody's expectations last year. So if he's merely in line with what we expected, that's going to be a step back. I think we're going to be good with Jameson Taillon. I think we're going to be good with Justin Steele. Question is, how healthy can those guys stay? And the Cubs have a number of other guys: Wicks, Assad, Ben Brown, Caleb Killian, Hayden Wesneski, Cade Horton, Brandon Birdsell, who have all had some shots, are all getting close to Major League ready, that kind of thing. They'll have a healthy competition and they'll have solid depth in the event of injury, but look for them to get some more of that. I really want to see the bullpen. Blake Trinan is available. He's been pretty well proven in the offseason or in the postseason. Ryan Stanek is a guy who's shown he can get outs in big spots. Brooks Raley, they could bring back Jorge Lopez. Like I said, I love AJ Minter. On the bench side, one guy that is kind of sneaky that I would really like the Cubs to get in on is Kyle Higashioka. Now, he played for the Padres. He could come in, be the backup catcher, split time, whatever, with Miguel Amaya. He speaks fluent Spanish. He speaks fluent Japanese. He could be really good to work with the Cubs pitching staff, help mentor Amaya. He's a solid player. Certainly would be better than Matt Tice. And he's probably only going to make a couple $1 million. When you look at the bench, guys like Jose Iglesias makes a lot of sense, kind of be that depth play, behind Nico and Dansby. They could go with potentially like a Yohan Moncada. I brought him up on the Bricks Behind the Ivy podcast not because he's so great, but he's a guy who just kind of failed off a really big contract. He's a former number 1 prospect in baseball. He has the tools. He struggled to stay healthy, and that's led to poor performance. But instead of making the money he's been making with the White Sox the last couple of years, you get him on a prove-it deal for a couple $1 million, maybe with some incentives, maybe with a team option for a second year kind of thing. It's a guy with actual skills. He could be that backup. And you start looking at the bench, and if you can replace someone like Miles Mastrobuoni or Nick Madrigal with Yohan Moncada, you're adding more pop, more raw talent, more overall ability. Now, I'm not saying he has to be the guy. There are other guys out there like him. Jose Iglesias is a great example. He would be a big upgrade over those guys. If the Cubs were to get a bench bat that could DH occasionally or platoon DH, that kind of thing, like JD Martinez was available last offseason for about $10 million, and I think pretty sure he's available this offseason too. Get someone like that on the bench, that's a gigantic upgrade over Patrick Wisdom. Now all of a sudden you've got a guy that, you can DH, you can play the matchups, and you start to get in a position now, if you build that bench with competent players who can go in and certainly fill an injury, that can spot start, that everybody on the bench, the Cubs have to put together a bench that they feel confident starting each guy 2 to 3 times a week. Because guys need to get off their feet. You can rotate through the DH and all that, but there's still, there's a mental grind to baseball. There's a physical grind to baseball. There's a playing through soreness and injury, which every player does, and everybody does it to an extent. But they shouldn't be playing through significant injury. You shouldn't have a knee injury that's sucking away all your power. You shouldn't have a come back too soon from fractured ribs where you can't torque your swing the way you typically need to in order to generate power. I think those are big reasons why the Cubs' power really fell off last year. And it's going to be tough. They need to fill the bench that way. And that's going to be to spend more money. Some of it will be kids. I would love for there to be a path for certainly Matt Shaw and then some combo of Owen Casey and Kevin Alcantara to make the opening day roster out of spring training. They don't have to be, you don't have to clear a path. You don't have to trade Itzhak Paredes or Nico Horner so that you can plug in Matt Shaw to play 6 and 7 times a week. You don't have to. You bring them up as a bench guy. Maybe Matt Shaw is comfortable being a utility guy. Maybe he can start 1 to 2 times a week for Paredes, once a week for Nico Horner, and one day a week that Dansby gets off his feet, Nico switches over to shortstop and Shaw plays second. There's 3 to 4 starts. You can do that and build him up. You don't have to clear a path, give them a position, put them in a position to fail. No, you put them in a position where they can get some work. They don't have to have the pressure of, okay, they traded Itzhak Paredes. Now I have to be the guy at third base. No, you get to go contribute and go win a job. If Matt Shaw comes up and crushes the way he's crushed with Team USA, the way he crushed in the minors last year, and he's doing that spot starting for Itzhak Paredes or being a super sub guy, awesome. You can figure out who you're going to put. Maybe they swap roles. Maybe Itzhak Paredes then becomes that super sub kind of guy. Or maybe at that point, that opens up a situation where you trade him in season. But give these guys a chance to get their feet wet. They're going to go through struggles. We saw it with Michael Busch last year. We saw it with PCA at the end of 2023 and then a good chunk of last year. We've seen it with Miguel Amaya. These are guys that were legitimate, talented, highly rated prospects, and they're still going to go through their struggles. Matt Shaw is probably not going to come up. I was going to say come up and beat Chris Bryant, but even Chris Bryant, he didn't hit a home run for 30 games when he first came up. He had a great season, obviously got Rookie of the Year, but he was not just automatic nails all season long, and he's like the best case scenario. So these guys are going to come up. Major league pitching is super hard to hit. They're going to adjust to him. The hitters are going to have to adjust back. I'm confident these guys can do it, but you don't have to put the team in a worse spot by, bringing them up, putting them in a position, having nobody that's a threat behind them to take playing time, which means you're locked into them. That's what the Cubs did with Christopher Morel last year. I appreciate the fact that they gave him a shot at third base and let him go for a while, but they didn't have a viable replacement at all. Nick Madrigal was not that guy. Even if he hadn't gotten hurt and sent down and played poorly, he was never going to be that guy. Patrick Wisdom wasn't that guy. So let these guys be there as a dynamic bench. Get a couple other, you can't have an all rookie bench either. So it's not, the bench is not going to be Moises Ballesteros, Owen Casey, Matt Shaw, and Kevin Alcantara. Go get a veteran bat or two. Go get like a JD Martinez type that can come in and just rake. Go find a guy who, is no longer a starting player now. Maybe if you want an outfielder, maybe like an Austin Hayes who got let go by the Phillies. There's been some surprise drops out there. Go take a look at those guys. But make that bench strong. Make that bench be a strength. The Cubs have good players. Sure, I would love for them to have a superstar. And maybe they can work out a trade and go get, Vladdy Jr. from Toronto. If they do and you give up significant prospect capital, then immediately you start working on a contract extension with Vlad because you don't want to give up, say, Owen Casey and 2 other prospects, and maybe Nico Horner, Owen Casey, and a pitching prospect for 1 year of Vlad Guerrero to let him walk in free agency next year. So I don't know what the Cubs' plans are. There's still a lot of options on the table, and it's going to be interesting to see, but I'm thankful to continue to have them as an outlet. I know we all get frustrated, but follow what they do. They're pretty consistent in what they do. They're pretty consistent in what they say. The Cubs say they have the CBT as a general target every season. And Tom Ricketts himself has said that is the kind of the minimum expectation for where they are. And when they need to go over, they'll push over. That's what he's done. Basically his entire tenure with the Cubs, that's where they've been, except for those times with the one time that he pulled it back after 2020, and that led to Darvish being traded, that led to the Kyle Schwarber non-tender, that led to all that stuff. That time, that's on Tom. Tom pulled that back. The other times, Theo made the choice in 2014 to start bringing the kids up and letting them play. That naturally had them be cheaper, and they went to 18th. And the very next year when they thought they had a chance to win, that became the time to go get John Lester, and that's when things turned. But, they've had a top 10 payroll in baseball 6 straight years during the end of the Theo era. And Crane Kenny and Tom have both said repeatedly that Jed has had more money on the table to spend than he spent the last several seasons. And even the last 2 seasons, they've been top 10 payroll in baseball. Should they be higher? Sure. Yes. I won't argue with you on that. I would prefer they go over the tax. It's not my money. Tom Ricketts is a billionaire and there's a lot of money there. It's still a business. They all still have budgets. For all the talk about Steve Cohen and he's putting together huge packages for Juan Soto, he clearly doesn't care what he spends on the baseball team. There's still a budget. And the Mets may well be operating. I don't know. It's so hard to know. Obviously, these books are not public, but it makes a difference how you carve out the various pieces. I could see a creative book situation where the New York Mets are operating at a loss. Now, on the whole, there's no way the entire enterprise is operating at a loss. There's no way the Cubs were operating at break even or a loss. I can see them splitting the books so that Crane Kenny can show that the Cubs as a baseball operation are running pretty close to break even, small profit margins, but there's no way between the company that owns all the properties around Wrigley, the Cubs themselves, like all those enterprises together, no chance. No chance those are running, 1% and 2% profits. But whatever, this is the game we play. This is the CBA we have. This is the economic structure baseball has. And there are still limits. The Dodgers are, I think I mentioned earlier, the Dodgers are doing exactly what you should do when you max out a player like Shohei Ohtani. Go huge for 5 years. We'll see what they look like after that. It's pretty clear they don't care. They also are a really good player development organization. So in 5 years, when some of these contracts are coming off the books and they're carrying a bunch of deferred money and performances start to decline, they may have the prospects ready to go to help fill that gap and create the next wave. But clearly they are gunning for championships right now. Yankees are in a pretty similar boat. There's also, while there's frustration about Bellinger's trade market, he will not get traded until after Juan Soto signs. Barring somebody making the Cubs maybe a ridiculous offer, the teams that make the most sense for Cody Bellinger are the teams that are chasing Juan Soto. So I could see potentially the Yankees trading for him, even if they get Soto, because they also need a first baseman. But I can definitely see the Yankees, the Phillies, the Mets, maybe not the Dodgers so much, especially given past history, but I could certainly see the Yankees and Phillies going after Bellinger, particularly the Yankees if they miss out on Soto. With that short porch in right field, his ability to play outfield and first base gives them a couple options, makes a lot of sense for them. And they're a team that can take on contract to work the terms out. But I don't know, to the point of, the Cubs not giving us info. I don't know what the Cubs' goal with that is. I do not believe it is to pocket the money, run with a 20th highest payroll in baseball kind of thing and go cheap this year. But I don't know if that means like maybe they were going to make a run at a higher level starting pitcher, taking advantage of some of his money, or if they were going to potentially go for a closer with that money. Like, I don't know what the plans were, but I am confident that money will get used. The CBT threshold is $241 million this year. So expect the Cubs to be between 230 and 235 to open the season. Gives them a few $1 million to play with at the trade deadline. And think about what the Cubs spent this year. The CBT this year was 237. So the Cubs are somewhere between 234 and 238-ish, depending on where they fall in those final calculations for the CBT. That's while carrying $10 million of dead money, paying Yan Gomes to go away. So that's like $13 million that was largely completely wasted on the season. But the Cubs actually spent. The Cubs are not carrying any salary into the season for the first time in a while. So, the Cubs could spend $230 million and have effectively a higher payroll than last year, have more space towards the CBT, and just be much more efficient with it. Just spend your money smarter. For all the talk about intelligent spending, Jed's made some really good deals. Sho Imanaga has a great contract. Ian Happ, Seiya Suzuki, Jameson Taillon, they're all very fairly paid. Justin Steele is an arbitration bargain at this point. Michael Busch is good. Nico Horner's on a very fair contract. Even Dansby Swanson, probably a little higher paid than you necessarily want him to be, still is on a pretty fair deal given what he gets in the premium at shortstop. So he doesn't really spend poorly, but he spent atrociously on the bench. The bench has kind of been, I think the bench has been kind of trying to go cheap. I know looking back, maybe we can just stop talking about the Craig Kimbrell trade. I really think that trade was really all about Cody Hoyer and then hoping they had something in Nick Madrigal. And then Cody Hoyer's arm fell off basically, and Nicky 5 steps couldn't hit or stay on the field. But what a lose-lose trade. The White Sox got Kimbrell, who at the time was the best closer in baseball. So on the one hand, it's disappointing the Cubs didn't get more for such a valuable trade asset, but it is what it is. And then the White Sox turn around and put a guy known to struggle when he's not the closer into the 8th inning, and he just blew up that year. And it did not work out well for either side. So I think we're all probably happy to close the books on that one. But there's still a lot of time to go. The winter meetings are coming up in early December. We won't see Roki Sasaki move until January. I think we will see some of the big names go. I think we already saw Snell sign, obviously. I'm not sure how much further behind Corbin Burns will be, possibly waiting until winter meetings. Juan Soto seems to be finalizing things. He's talked to, I think he has 5 teams on the hook right now. He's already gotten offers. We know from a number of teams. There's been a reported offer from the Mets that I think Boston maybe has come over the top of. I think that stuff will work itself out probably fairly quickly. He's going to want to know where he's going to be. And then after that, some of the dominoes will start to fall. And then this is a baseball off season. Try not to get sucked too much into the knee-jerk reactions as this thing happens or that thing happens. Even if the Cubs did what everybody wants them to do and go big, you're only going to sign one big offensive free agent and maybe one big starting pitcher. It's not like the Cubs are going to go out and sign 12 guys. Number one, they don't need to. Number two, they're certainly not going to do it. That's not their MO. And so within the framework of what the Cubs typically do, they've spent $25 to $28 million on players before. They've given out contract offers that could go up to like a short-term deal worth $30 million. I could absolutely see the Cubs playing in that space. They have the money to do it. But I think they are also very much focused on rebuilding the bench. I hope Craig Counsell is having a lot of say in that process. They continue to add development resources on the baseball side. They brought in a couple new hitting development guys from Milwaukee that was just announced this morning right before I started the podcast. They brought in Tyler Zombro, talked a little bit about last week. The Cubs continue to invest in the system, and it's that pipeline of player development that is going to be the magic anyway. We talk about all the money the Dodgers spend, but it's also that they are A+ at developing talent. The Houston Astros are elite at developing talent. The Tampa Bay Rays stay relevant because they're elite at developing talent. The teams that have struggled to get on top, stay on top, the Yankees largely just spend money. They have some top prospects, but they're not really a development machine. San Francisco has struggled. They're not a development machine. San Diego seems to do just enough. They spend a bunch of money. They always seem to have enough in the pipeline to trade for the next player. But, they're not generating a ton of major league talent for their team. So there's a place in here to fit. But the most important thing is the Cubs, to quote one of my favorite baseball books written by Ben Lindbergh and Sam Miller, Ben Lindbergh of Effectively Wild podcast and Sam Miller, his former co-host, the only rule is it has to work. Whatever the Cubs do this offseason, and I would highly recommend that book. It's great. Sam and Ben take over an independent league team and kind of try to apply analytical concepts to running a baseball team. And it's a very interesting look at that whole process. But, the Cubs have to find results this season. There are a lot of ways they can do it, but they have to be successful. And so happy Thanksgiving to you and yours. I hope you have a great holiday. Hopefully you enjoy some good food, enjoy some family, friends, and, be thankful for the people around you. Be thankful that we have baseball. Be thankful that we have things to talk about. And I'm thankful for you. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts. And share the episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS+. And check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/CubsPS+ to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS+ podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!